Talaman, Geek Talk. Let's enjoy the show. Talaman always got a plan. Geek Talk is popping where it's really at. Represents geek culture, homie got structure. Sometimes it's vulgar, screw cancel culture. Feel like Luffy, smart to say the least. Loving One Piece, man, really loves to eat. Everybody knows the show is really is Talaman. You know what time it is. Let's go, Geek Talk.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Geek Talk with Tyler. As always, I am your host, Tyler. Today I'll be joined by my co-host, James. James, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us today.
You're very welcome. I'm glad to be on for a second time.
Well, technically the first time, second recording. But with all that said and done, would you like to tell us a little bit more about yourself, who you are, what you do, where people can find you, etc., etc., etc.?
So, my name is James, and I live in Silver Spring, Maryland, which is outside Washington, D.C., and I have a cosplay page called Fix It Jim Cosplay. I am a regular at most cons, so my home conventions are Otakon, Katsucon, and MagFest. I just recently got back from Zenkai Con back on Sunday. So much fun. But what about you, Tyler?
Oh, I am a born and native New Yorker, so as such, the conventions I have been to, or at least I will most frequently attend, would be New York Comic Con and Anime NYC, though not this year because inflation exists, the prices are ridiculously high, but I will enjoy the smaller conventions as well. You will be finding me at Terrificon this year, as well as the convention in Secaucus. I will probably be networking or cosplaying. Either way, you'll see your friendly neighborhood Tyler man. With all that said and done, yes, let's get to our topic at hand, shall we? Animation is definitely one of the more successful forms of media, to say the least. And yet, two countries are well known for producing them. It's obvious who they are, but we're going to say them anyway. The United States of America and Japan. This episode will be discussing countries that are not the USA or Japan as their animation thereof. We'll be talking about animation across the globe, animation that thrives really well in certain countries, and some countries that really stand out in the world of animation. If we do talk about animation from US or Japan, it'll be a relative comparison point, but the focus of this episode is to be discussing animation from these countries. So with that said and done, let's start with Canada, America's friendly cousin. What can you tell me about Canadian animation there, James?
So, one thing I know about animation from Canada is a lot of shows that were made in Canada came on networks like PBS. They came on, I'm trying to think, because my memory of Canadian animation is kind of vague. I remember a while back discovering on this TV, there was actually a Canadian show called Clyde. Clyde was a show about a jukebox that was possessed by an android from outer space. The theme song went, and they call him Clyde. It is a very, very interesting show about two twins. One's a boy and one's a girl. But the show was around in the late 80s and early 90s.
Well, I think that highlights the first part of what we're going to say about Canadian animation. It's that a lot of the times it's there and we don't recognize it as not an American animation. You know, it's like the I can't believe it's not American of animation. For those of you that didn't get the reference, it's the I can't believe it's not butter. I can't believe this is not American. So your shows like your Dragon Tales, your Arthur, Cyber Chases are not of American make, but are in fact of a Canadian product. Sorry they're not dripping in poutine and gravy, but here we are. But as far as Canadian shows go, there are some ways to determine of what's Canadian and what's American. This isn't a golden rule per se, but I think this is usually a common factor. that I've picked up or two. Something I've definitely noticed when I'm watching certain anime. Case in point, many of the anime that do exist take place in Japan. While many of the anime exist in their own world, your Hunter x Hunters, your One Pieces, Naruto, etc., many of the anime that do exist take place in Japan, specifically the slice of life. Now, if there's a show that takes place in Canada, there's a very good chance it's of Canadian make, because localization does breed familiarity. Are there any shows that whose setting is in Canada that you feel are worth a shout out?
I'm trying to think shows specifically set in Canada that are worth a shout out. That's a very good question because I hardly watch anything from Canada.
So you're
Uh,
racist against Canada then?
no,
Dude,
I
I'm
have
kidding.
nothing.
It's fine. It's a preparation taste. But there's one show that does come to mind. It's basically Survivor if it was directed by Canadian animators. This, of course, being the Total Drama franchise. It was a show that started with the original Total Drama Island. Had about 26 episodes or so. It was 26, maybe 30 episodes. I was on Cartoon Network frequently. But I think what I'm going to notice about Cartoon Network is that they were definitely more open to more foreign content as opposed to its big rival, Nickelodeon. Of course, Cartoon Network's the same channel that introduced us, or I guess one of the ways many anime fans were introduced into anime. Either it's with Toonami or 4Kids. It was one of the many stations that did serve as a gateway. Case in point, Cartoon Network was also the gateway for Canadian animation. This, of course, being shows like Total Drama and 16. And if you remember that show, Johnny... what's the Brain Kid guy? He's got a talking dog with two twin sisters.
Was it Johnny Test?
Johnny Test, yes, I think so. I could be wrong about that, but
No, you're talking about the right show. I knew about it. For some reason, I thought it was a Dexter's Laboratory ripoff, but that show came.
Come on. It definitely feels like a Dexter's Lab, ripoff. Unless it's the other way around, it's like, oh, this anime feels like a ripoff of The Lion King. It's like, dude, this anime came out before The Lion King. We're not going to say which ones, but I think you all know which ones. But back to Canada. Yes, much like anime and its setting of Japan, this is one way to pick it up, is if the setting is in Canada, that's definitely a good indicator that it's of Canadian make. Saying that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it definitely helps. And of course, if you got the whole saturation of Canadian dialect, or you say a boot or a dear, then spoiler alert, it's of Canadian make. In fact, quick shout out to Mr. C. One of the shameless Family Guy clones that we talk about, Forget About It, and I'm not telling you to forget about it. Like the actual show is called Forget About It. Talks about your stereotypical Italian-esque family, mafia dad, mafia wife. You got the popular rich daughter, the liberal-esque son who's trying to be woke as hell that annoys the hell out of everybody, and then the Stewie-esque dad, or not stuck, I cannot English say, the Stewie-esque child, and of course the perverted uncle who a lot of the time seems as the point of reason. But then again, this is the whole trope that Family Guy has followed for countless years. Only difference is if it's a mafia and it's a it's in Canada as part of a witness relocation program. You ever familiar with that show, James?
Oh, Witness Relocation Program?
No, that show. I just talked
Uh,
about.
I can't say I have, but I'm interested in finding an episode.
It's on YouTube. I kind of feel like it's predictable. Honestly, it's not worth the watch, but if you want to watch for the sake of researching, go for it. It only lasted 3 seasons.
It's not bad for a show.
Well, I mean that depends on the show. If it's like
Oh,
if it's a Fox show, then that's great. But but if it's not, but otherwise, I'd say that's debatable. But then again, this really leads off to: is it a quality thing or is it a quantity thing? 3 seasons. Hell, our next show, which actually took place in the animation of Canada, Beast Wars. I don't want to get too involved in this series because I dedicated an entire episode for my live show on it, Talk Geek with Tyler. Why don't we start out by breaking down what it is? It's essentially a sequel prequel. Do you know what that is, James?
no. A sequel, prequel? Is it, you mean the show?
No, the actual term. Do you know what a sequel? All right, we're moving forward by saying, "Do you know what something is?" I'll tell you straight up, do you know the show sequel prequel? Or if I say, "Do you know what sequel prequel is?" Do you know what the term sequel prequel is?
It is a show that is a continuation, but then tells something from the beginning.
In a way, yes. But in this case, this actually does require time travel. It starts off with the descendants of the Decepticons and Autobots, who, for the record, are essentially the same race. But it's kind of like a side thing. It's like I hate kind of being that person. It's like the descendants of the Republicans and the Democrats. I'm not going to say which one's which because I don't want to be that guy. But essentially, that's the whole concept of Maximals and the Autobots. They are essentially the descendants of those two factors. And as such, Megatron stole the Golden Disc, an alien relic. There's more on that, but I'll save that for possibly another episode. As we go on with the show, Megatron kidnapped the disc in order to find Energon, who he thought to find said Energon, but it turns out it was a prehistoric Earth. And the best way to do that was to go back in time. James, you seem to be headlocking a knot during this show. Do you want to contribute this at all?
I will try my best to contribute as much as I know, Tyler.
All right, well, how familiar are you with Beast Wars in general?
I remember vaguely seeing it back when I was in maybe second grade because it came on either Channel 7 or Channel 20. It's one of those shows that came on at a very weird time.
Honestly, I kind of oddly missed that. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm glad we do have streaming services and the easily accessibility thereof, but it just doesn't feel earned, you know? It's like you remember the Saturday mornings where it's like, okay, I'm finally done with school. You wake up extra early, your Jackie Chan Adventures, your Beast Wars, your all those other shows that came on.
Oh yeah, I remember. Well, sometimes for streaming, sometimes I like to recreate my Saturday mornings by getting up at maybe 8 and rewatching an episode of Detention.
I'm sorry, you're saying tension? Or is that
Detention.
10? Oh,
Be
Detention. Okay, yeah, that
yeah,
show.
yeah. There, you remember that show?
I really don't want to be sarcastic, so I'm just going to say yes.
Okay, but yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be that show, but there are
No,
also
I
very
got the concept you're going for, but I don't want to get too sidetracked by this. But back to Beast Wars, essentially, it was made by the same company that made Reboot. It was a 3D-esque show. Now the effects look like they were done by an amateur if we hold them by today's standards. But back then, it was groundbreaking, and it was more costly. So, as such, the amount of characters we had to have were a lot less than the Generation 1 counterpart. But what we lost in the amount of characters, we gained character development, especially in the episode Code of Hero. But yes, it did feature such talented voices like Gary Chalk, Scott McNeil, and David Kay. So take that with a grain of salt as you will. Definitely it's definitely the game changer of the Transformers lore. And if you haven't checked out my episode about it for Talking with Tyler, please do. And a very big shout out to Dan Lenane, the host of the Rock Nerd Radio podcast, who is a big fan of it. And what are your thoughts of the Beast Wars movie coming out?
Hopefully, it will be true to the original cartoon.
I mean, well, if it's going to be I don't think it's going to be true to the original cartoon. I mean, for looking at the team, I can already tell you it's not, because the original team composed of Optimus Primal, Rhinox, Cheetor, Rat Trap, and Dinobot. But from the looks of it, we're losing Rat Trap and Dinobot and getting Airazor, who was underused in the series, I will admit. And it's also one of those crossovers with Megatron. And I'm not sure if it was a Back to the Future thing, or they somehow did a Time Warp-esque thing. But either way, there's something to figure out. But honestly, I think that's the one thing we need to focus on for any live-action movie. Whether it's any of the god-awful Disney reboots or just any Turtle incarnation or Transformers, DC, Marvel. It's just glorified fan fiction. I think that's all it really is.
And glorified money.
Oh, hey, I mean, the whole part of the entertainment business is kind of the focus on the business aspect.
Agreed. But again, quality over quantity.
In theory, that holds water. In theory. I mean, let's look at the Pinocchio movies that came out in 2023. We have the big three. We have the Disney Shameless reboot. We have the Guillermo del Toro fancy one. And then we got another one, which I want to say is just a knockoff reboot from something else entirely, but I really didn't pay attention to it. I would avoid the Disney one, but do watch the Guillermo del Toro one. It is stop motion, and it's a lot different than what you're probably used to, but it was really well done.
I agree on that. The ending actually put me in tears.
Like, if you told me, like, if it was animated in Japan, I would say it would be at least Ghibli level good.
Agreed.
But what's the big takeaway from Canadian animation?
Canadian animation is underrated. It is overlooked, and they have some pretty good voice actors from the north.
They do, actually. They really do. It is very underrated. And it is funny that we, do you remember you grew up watching Fox Kids, right?
Yes, I did.
You remember X-Men Evolution?
Yes.
They actually got a couple of the Beast Wars characters for, or Beast Wars actors for that series. David Kaye was Professor Xavier, and they got Scott McNeil as Wolverine.
Nice.
I mean, don't get me wrong, he's no Steve Blum, but he wasn't bad either.
Gotcha. Scott McNeil, if I can remember, Scott McNeil also did a lot of anime stuff, right?
Not as much as Steve Blum has, but I definitely recall him being shaky in one of the One Piece pirate films. But any actor who can do domestic and foreign films has definitely earned or is definitely worth their weight in gold as far as voice acting goes.
Because I'm surprised to see his credits in a lot of things.
It's one of those things where you don't expect to see them. I know David Kaye has. He's voiced Raccoon in one of I want to say Ocean Dub, don't quote me on that. The Dragon Ball Z. He's voiced Shishomaru. And if you're still watching One Piece Funimation dubbed, first off, hats off to you. Second, he currently voices Kaido. He started off as a big fish, that of course being Death Charge in Beast Wars, and he continues his career to be an even bigger fish. And for those of you that don't get the reference, Kaido's Devil Fruit is the fish fruit model Soryu. With that aside, yes, Canada Canadian animation is very similar to Western animation. By that I mean American animation, but it's its own distinct, unique thing. So with that said and done, let's look at our other country, the UK. First off, what the hell is with British animation? I mean, don't get me wrong, it's good at tackling dark subjects. It feels like everything out of that country is dark. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Which example would you like to give?
Let's see. If you remember reading Animal Farm when you were maybe elementary school or high school.
You mean the book that was essentially an allegory towards communist Russia?
Yes. That movie was actually surprisingly dark. I've seen it before. It's a very fascinating film, and it was also the UK's first animated film. Animated film.
I knew what you meant, and honestly, it did really well. But then again, the America had to have its own version. It was a live action version. It kind of had the Babe feel to it. It's like where they made the animals talk. It's like I don't know why they do that or why they did that. Why could you just leave animation to what it is? Like, why does everything need to have a live action counterpart?
Experimental. And to
Yeah.
recapture.
Okay, yeah, but yes, Animal Farm is definitely. For those of you that are unfamiliar with Animal Farm, whether it's any of the two movies that came out or the book itself, the book is essentially an allegory. An allegory take on communist Russia. The one night, the farm owner kind of just has a bad time with everything. The barn's definitely seen some better days. The old boar hog decides to call a meeting and essentially talk about a utopia in which all the animals thrive and prosper peacefully. But turns out that went astray due to the fact that after the animals expelled the previous owner, I'm spacing on the name. On the Mr. Jones.
Mr. Jones, yes.
Yeah, can't English today. Mr. Jones. The pigs essentially took over, but they're like, "Oh, don't worry about thinking. We'll do that for you from now on." So that's why, in theory, communism works. As you see, it goes on. They change a lot of the commandments they had. For example, no animal shall sleep in a bed, but then the pigs change it to no animal shall sleep in a bed with sheets. So it's kind of like a lawyer rule, if that makes sense. But eventually, the only rule they had was Napoleon is always right. Kind of find it funny that they called him Napoleon instead of something like Stalin. I guess they didn't want to be too on the nose or too on the snout.
Right.
Yeah, that was a bad dad joke. But that said, yeah, essentially, they do very dark stuff. Another example would be Watership Down. Yeah, the cute movie with the rabbits, not so cute.
It was like Peter Rabbit on steroids.
It's like Peter Rabbit on meth. And it's like it's like the BBC version of Rabbits, but it's like, they did a recent, I say more recent adaptation, I should say. But it was like that weird CGI thing. And here's what I hate about reboots. In the original, movie, and yes, it was a movie originally, they needed does, which are what female rabbits are called, because, well, that's how you continue the next generation. You have all males there, you gotta have women. But in this one, they just say, oh, we need women because they're the ones that can dig burrows. Because God forbid you can say, because we're horny enough as rabbits to fuck. So I don't know if that's something they intentionally looked over, or they just thought, it's not that important. Either way, I'd just stick to the original. And is it supposed to be gory? Yes. Yes, it is. Just to show you that cute little rabbits do have it pretty rough. But as far as TV shows go, they're not exactly without their blood and gore either. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, Tyler.
Would you like to share it with us?
About Watership Down?
About the show.
Which show? Regarding...
All right, so you don't know. So I guess I'll take the helm from here.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with the series Game of Thrones?
Yes. Actually, my friends and my brother watched that show. It's not my kind of show. I think it's a bit overhyped, but I hear good things about it, though.
What if I told you there is a Game of Thrones, but with animals from the UK?
Oh, interesting.
It's called The Animals of Farthingwood.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I had a friend that watches that show, but I did not know it went that far.
Yeah, it really did. It feels like every time we get a character, we just ended up losing them. On the first season alone, we've lost a shit ton of the characters that were intended to go in the Farthingwood. The newts, the pheasants, the baby mice, which was the most grismal death of all, and so on and so forth. The amount of animals that died there did not exactly make this a child-friendly show. And keep in mind, this aired in the 90s, so what does that tell you?
That people were not as sensitive or trying to be a bit more edgy with storylines.
Well, I mean, to be fair, 90s was a playground of edgy material. X-Men, Batman, Gargoyles, # keep engine Gargoyles.
And Captain Planet, because there was an episode where Linka's cousin died from an overdose.
Yeah, see, you're saying a singular episode. But shows like Gargoyles and Batman and Animals of Farthingwood, all those shows were consistently dark. Which is a good thing. Because, I mean, look, the 80s, let's do a little nostalgia trip. All the 80s shows were just Saturday morning shtick. Essentially. It's like, oh, cute and funsy. It's just a story. Don't think about the plot. 90s was a big 360. Yes, let's think about the plot. Which, to be fair, explains why Robot Chicken does a lot more 80s parodies than it does 90s parodies. But I'm getting sidetracked again. So back to England. A lot of the material I have definitely noticed is that they actually do speak English, which, yay, I'm not language shaming, but it's easier to understand them. Just like Canada, they also speak English, except there's one different thing. The dialect is a little off-putting. Do you know any examples thereof?
You mean like a Welsh accent or a Scottish accent?
Well, no, dialect is different than an accent.
Okay.
An accent...
A dialect is how someone else speaks, Tyler?
No, you can have a dialect and not an accent. This is something I've actually looked up. An accent is the way you're saying something, whereas a dialect is the words particularly you'll say something. Like, say you want to have a bag of chips. If you're in the UK, they'd be a bag of crisps. So that would be the dialect, whereas the accent would just be much more distinguishable than a dialect. So you can have an accent without a dialect, but you can't really have a dialect without an accent.
Makes sense, because I believe in the North we call it. In some parts of the United States they call it soda, but in the Midwest they call it pop. So is that an example of a dialect?
Yes, it actually is a good example of a dialect.
Oh wow.
Or it's a regional thing, I suppose.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense to me. That makes sense.
Right. Or I guess it'd just be terms of euphemism. Like, what you call it? I guess a more, although not politically correct, example of a dialect is referring to the Germans as Krauts for World War II. Which, okay, yeah, I get it. Different time. That's your dialect, but not appropriate today by today's standards. But not getting political on this. That's essentially kind of was the turnoff for a lot of English shows, but not necessarily an immediate turnoff. But what I have noticed about English animation, and by British animation, I should be more accurate, they do a lot of stop motion really well.
Oh yeah.
I don't want to talk too much about it because I believe stop motion should have its own episode. But a lot of the stuff DreamWorks came out with was because of the UK and was because of Aardman Entertainment. Your Chicken Runs, your Wallace and Gromit cartoons, and if you remember, Flushed Away, which did have a lot of surprisingly English and one Hugh Jackman, Australian. Was he Australian?
Yes, Hugh Jackman is Australian.
Wow, that's two. Two for a guy that's Canadian. He's had two Australian actors portray him. If that's not funny, I don't know what is.
Interesting. Actually, not to get too sidetracked, but funny story. Hugh Jackman randomly appeared at my cousin's apartment donating food during the pandemic. This was 3 years ago.
Oh, that's actually very wholesome.
Oh, yeah.
Was it because of the pandemic or was it unrelated?
I don't quite remember, but you know how celebrities are. They like to give back to the community.
Do they like to give back, or do they like to, show that they like to give back?
They I guess they like to show that they like to give back and just show another side to them when they're not acting.
That's fair, and I do believe a lot of the people do that out of the goodness of their own heart, but I do believe that people would capitalize on that. It's like, look how nice I'm being.
Yeah, capitalizing that's a red flag.
It is, but you know what? Whatever you need to do to help your business, your mark on the world thrive, I kind of respect that. But he's just trying to be a good person, so you gotta take the good with the bad. That said, I would try and be a more positive person and would like to believe Hugh Jackman donated food out of the goodness of his heart. But if you don't mind my asking, why did he donate? Like, was there something wrong with your cousin?
Oh no, it was for everyone in the apartment. It was for all people in the town of Brooklyn.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it wasn't just for him. It was for everyone in that apartment complex in Brooklyn.
Must have been during the price inflation or something. But regardless, yes. So what's the takeaway from British? Oh, is there any other movies you would like to talk about? As far as British animation is concerned, we've talked about, Plague Dogs. That is more gruesome than Animal Farm, if you can believe that.
I am not familiar with Plague Dogs. Go ahead, Tyler.
How familiar are you with animal experimentation?
The only thing I know about is The Secret of NIMH. We're not talking about American animation.
We're not. And this makes Secret of NIMH, comparatively speaking, look something as wholesome as Cinderella.
Ooh.
But that does give me an idea for a possible episode. So, thank you. I'm going to piggyback that for a possible episode. But essentially, it focuses on two dogs that have broken away from an experimental lab where many of the animals that are there, or all the animals are there, are experimented upon. One of the experiments we open with is where we place the dog in a tub of water. How long can the dog swim before realizing that there's no point of them going anywhere and just automatically gives up? Kind of showing that there's no point in doing anything if there's no achievable goal.
That sounds pretty fucked up to me.
It came from the UK. Of course, it's fucked up. So, which actually was based on a book, believe it or not, of the same name.
Interesting.
A book by Richard Adams.
Oh wow.
Oh, well, you say, oh wow. Like, do you know who he is?
I am not sure who Richard Adams is, but I did have a teacher who had a name similar, Adamson. And funny story, her son is named Richard.
That is interesting. It focuses on the two dogs named Snitter and Rove, who, funny enough, you may recognize this character. John Hurd voices Snitter.
Nice.
Do you know who John Hurd is?
Yes. Wait. Did John Hurt is still alive? Because the name sounds very familiar.
I remember him being in Hellboy. I don't think he's still alive.
Oh. Okay.
He is, drumroll please. No, he actually died in 2017.
Oh. Okay. Yeah. John Hurt he wasn't Harry Potter, was he?
No, but when people said when you're searching John Hurd, people are also searching Maggie Smith. So I do understand the understandable confusion.
Gotcha.
But he's had a myriad of performances, and again, English actor for an English role. And
Right.
it's funny how you get a lot of English. When we get America, we get black actors, we have Asian actors, white actors, Hispanic actors. We got actors all over the place. When you go to other countries, like, no, we specifically have Canadian actors. We specifically have British actors. Or Japan, we specifically have Japanese actors. It really tells you something, doesn't it?
Oh yeah.
Not to get too political, but it kind of shows you how diverse America is as opposed to the rest of the world. And you could say they're all American. You're not wrong about that. We are all American, but we all don't originate from America.
Nope, we don't. And that's what's unique about this country.
Yes, and a lot of people say America is one country. Technically, they're correct, but the way I see it, America is 50 smaller countries composed into one big country.
Oh yeah. I'm not sure if I told you this one time, Tyler, but if I had to compare Washington D.C. to New York City, I feel like New York City is like a whole different country. D.C. is nothing but a village. Let's just be real.
I've been to both, and yeah, you're not wrong. New York is way more chaotic. Like, I could be there 10 times and it would still be chaotic. Like, it's a city that never sleeps, needs a fucking nap, I'll tell you that much.
Yeah. But let's just be careful what happened 3 years ago with the pandemic, because that almost happened. Because everything shut down, the whole world shut down.
I've
3 years
survived a pandemic. I've survived falling on my ass because of a seizure. I've survived watching Frozen with my niece, and I've survived working in New Jersey. I think I can survive whatever's thrown at me next.
I feel you, Tyler. I feel you.
Well, if you feel me, can you buy me a drink?
Sober or not sober?
Are you sober, or do you want me not to be sober?
I always party sober, dude. I don't like the taste of alcohol.
So you're asking if I want an alcoholic drink?
I suppose.
Well, I'm an Angry Orchard man. Do whatever you want with that knowledge. But with that said and done, what's the takeaway for British animation? Much like Japanese animation, they are not shy to tackle sensitive subjects like the States used to be. And I'm going to do a quick, brief rundown. You know what I've noticed a lot about the Disney movies that exist?
Yes. What about them?
I'll admit, their animation is getting a lot better. Like, compared to what it originally had, phenomenally better. But animation can only set a movie or story so much. It's like an accoutrement over an entire movie. Which is why I've never personally really liked the Avatar sequel. I mean, visually it was good, but it feels like it's one of those movies where you just pop an edible and enjoy the show. What I'm going to say about it is that it feels like a lot of the morals of the stories is just keeping the peace. I mean, it's true that Zootopia did have allegoric racism to it, and I appreciate that. But other than that, it feels like every other one was just keeping the peace. What's the point of Frozen? We're keeping the peace. What's the point of Moana? Kind of a Lion King-esque ripoff thing. But Encanto, keeping the peace. Raya, keeping the peace. Strange World, we're keeping the peace. Everyone is just keeping the peace. You ever notice that?
Yeah. I guess maybe they're trying to put a little bit more dynamic. I don't think this is a word, but they're trying to show a little bit more dynamic. Trying to show that villains are a little bit more dynamic and they're not as bad as they should be, because in real life we live in a society that's that used to be black and white, but now everything is sort of gray. You get what I'm saying, Tyler?
I do, and you mean diverse? Is that what you're referring to?
No, I'm not talking about race. I'm actually talking about.
Well, diverse doesn't always apply to race. Like, my plate could be diverse. It's got vegetables, it's got meat, it's got carbs. Doesn't have diverse about food.
Agreed.
But I'll
But
admit, it is the first thing when people think of, like, when you say World War, you automatically want to say two. Everybody knows that there was a first one. It's like Terminator. You automatically want to say two.
right. But I do miss classic villains. I'm going to be real with you. The closest thing we had to a classic Disney villain was Tamatoa in Moana, but he had a very small role in that movie.
Was he really a villain? I mean, he just wanted to steal stuff.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with you on that. I totally agree with you. But I felt like most of the villains went extinct with Mother Gothel.
I mean, the lamb was kind of a good villain from
Yeah.
Zootopia.
Oh yeah. She was. Yeah, I agree.
I mean, if we like had a backstory about a whole bunch of what you call it predators abusing her when she was a kid or something, then you know what? Okay, yeah, that would make sense. I would actually feel sorry for her. But we only find out about it in the last few minutes of the film, so it just didn't feel earned.
I agree with you on that. And last week, I actually cosplayed Nick Wilde's father at a formal when I
Well,
was
hang
at.
on, we never saw his father, so how can you cosplay as his dad?
It was from concept art. It was from unused concept art from Zootopia. I just googled Nick Wilde in formal attire, and that popped up.
Huh, interesting.
Oh yeah.
I'll have to definitely look into that, but did you have a nice time at that con, by the way?
Oh my gosh, ZenkaiCon was fantastic, and you don't have to be an anime person to enjoy it. There's actually a lot of people who like sci-fi and high fantasy who attend that con, and the staff was friendly. The layout of the convention center was actually very easy to navigate, in my opinion, and you didn't feel like, and it was very hard to get lost because like everything was easy to find. It's not like the Walter E. Convention Center or the Baltimore Convention Center where it's ridiculously huge. Everything is planned out. Everything is spaced out easily, and also it's easy to find people.
Well, that's
But
good,
it was,
but back to the point we have. Um, the British animation that we have, and will continue to have, isn't shy to tackle subjects. Disney used to do it, Fox and the Hound especially. One of my favorite films really didn't have a villain per se. It was more like an anti. It's like an I don't want to say anti-hero. It was more like an anti-villain
yes,
because he just started out as just a normal guy. I mean, sure, he hunted animals, but he didn't do that just because he's evil. He did it to survive. He lived in the woods. My brother-in-law hunts many animals, deer included. And he actually keeps all the parts, so he eats the meat. Very wilderness of him. But the whole thing
cool.
started because Todd came over, trespassed on his property, messed with his chickens, and eventually caused one of the dogs, who I'm surprised didn't die from that fall. It's kind of weird, right?
That was Chief.
Yeah, Chief.
And in the original book, spoiler alert, he did die because the book is different from the movie. The book is actually more darker.
Spoiler alert, they actually swapped the names. Um, Chief was the younger dog, and I'm
Todd
sorry,
was the older.
Todd. Yeah, Todd was the older dog.
Yep.
I guess Disney would have
I
thought it
mean,
would make more
yeah, no,
sense.
Copper. My bad. Copper was the older dog. Chief was the younger dog. Todd is the fox.
Yeah, well, whoever's name is who. The point is that the names got switched. They did a full Richard Parker on that. Excuse me. And it just shows that Disney's not is capable of tackling serious subject matter in their movies, but doesn't always do so.
Right.
At the end, where we see Todd on the verge of death because he sacrificed himself to save the bear, Amos Slade was getting ready to blow the fox's head off. Copper stands in front of him. He's like, "Don't." To which Amos says, "Copper, get out of the way." He's like, he doesn't say it, but in his eyes you could say, "Why? What's this going to accomplish? What's done is already done. There's no need to do this." And then in his face, you can tell Amos Slade is starting to regret all of this. It's like, why am I doing this to begin with? And then decides to just leave. Which, are you ready to hear something mind-blowing?
Mm-hmm.
Amos Slade was also voiced by the man who portrayed Grandpa Joe in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory.
That I already knew, and also that's one of my favorite movies.
Fox and the Hound or Willy Wonka?
Both.
Still, pretty interesting concept.
Oh yeah.
Unless I'm thinking of the god-awful Tim Burton remake.
Yeah, I was gonna mention that was actually the former The Fox and the Hound was actually Jack Albertson's last film role.
Voice acting or just in general?
In general.
Well, being part of the Disney legacy when it actually meant something is a good note to leave off on.
Agreed.
But now we've focused on the UK, we focused on Canada. Let's focus on what many people consider anime, but is technically not anime. Korean animation. You're probably more familiar with Korean animation than I am. Any forms of Korean animation you believe are worth a particular shout out?
Cubics robots for everyone.
Would you like to shed us a little light on that?
So Cubics was a CGI show that aired in the early to mid 2000s on Kids WB. Such a very overlooked show. I have a best friend who used to be obsessed with that show. So it was about a kid who moves into a town where everything is run by robots. But unfortunately, the father is a bit prejudiced about robots. And the kid feels like a pariah because he doesn't own one, because every kid in town has a robot. So it just so happens that a robot who's with no one happens to follow the boy. And forgive me, but it's been years. I've actually forgot some of the names of the protagonists. But Cubics is a very, very interesting show, and that show wasn't shy from being dark, because there were episodes where I believe someone actually did get killed. And what was unique about Cubics was you had some Pokemon voice actors in that show.
For kids or?
Yeah, like, it was for kids dubbed. The show Cubics Robots for Everyone was Cubics. Was for kids dubbed.
Interesting. If you remember the first take, we spoke about one that particularly involves chickens, believe it or not. Leafy, A Hen in the Wild.
Yes. I saw that movie a while back at Anime Club in 2021, or pardon me, in 2011 or 2012. But what about it, Tyler?
Well, first off, what do you recall about it?
It had a very distinct style to it. I remember there being a goose, and I do remember the weasel. And I do remember that it's a very popular tale in South Korea. It's basically almost like their version of Charlotte's Web.
It's also one of the most successful winning. I can't speak today. It is it's the most successful film as far as Korea goes by animation standards.
Nice.
Kind of breaking the animated film record, believe it or not. Okay. Which made about 6.5 million, which, to be fair, would be peanuts for us, but to them, still pretty good.
Oh, yeah.
This was in 2011.
Okay. So yeah, we saw it. I believe we might have seen it the following year.
Yes, and the quote they have for it, I'm going to paraphrase. It was, hang on one second, I have it right here. The quote they had for it was based off the book of, name is escaping me right now. Book is Sun. The book was based off The Hen Who Dreamed She Could Fly by Huang Sun Mi. I apologize if I'm butchering that, but the quote she has about death not being the end, about just being a new beginning, was just really inspiring. And let me ask you, when it comes to anime, you're probably more of a dubber than a subber, right?
Yeah, I'm a mixed bag, but some sub is okay, but I prefer dub because I just want to I just want to be able to not look at the screen so much just to read things.
Well, what anime from Japan, for the record, do you believe is better off subbed?
Let me think about this. Card Captor Sakura, although I have not seen this subbed in like a very long time.
Interesting. Anything else?
Um, Let me think. This is tough. Um, Shows that are better subtitled. Shoot, because like I'm gonna say maybe sometimes the Ranma show, but that's like that's very
The
that's
current one or the?
the one from the 80s
I can see
was
that going either way, but Korean in dubbed just doesn't match well. English dubbed, I should say. It's just better off in its original content.
interesting. I never knew that they tried to dub Korean animated shows.
They have, and if you think doing it dubbed is weird, Korean is even weirder.
Oh
So,
wow.
Paddock is another example of such. That one's more graphic because it talks about fresh fish being prepared, but just the point of view of the fish. So kind of a darker version of Finding Nemo, if you will.
Ooh, now you got me interested in some of these shows.
And if we're going to do one more mention as far as Korean animation goes, if you possibly remember this show or know which I'm referring, if you have Netflix, check out the series Lookism.
Lookism, okay.
Yeah, it's a Korean animated series. Basically, it's like racism, but just by appearance. I don't mean like, oh, he's black, oh, he's fat or something. No, I mean like actual physical appearances. So it's kind of like elitism with. It's like Mean Girls level elitism, I should say.
Okay. Wow, this sounds very entertaining and fascinating.
Yeah, say what you want about foreign content. It definitely has a way of not using reboots like America does.
I
With that
see.
said, we've tackled Canadian animation, we've tackled British animation, and we've tackled Korean animation. Um, if you would like to learn more about this, I recommend you go on YouTube and check out Steve Reviews. He does a lot of great stuff as far as breaking down the stuff. I actually got some of my suggestions from him in terms of checking the stuff out. And if
Nice.
you like his stuff, feel free to mention in the comments that I was recommended by Geek Talk with Tyler. Definitely help a brother out. With that said and done, James, thank you so much for your time and taking the time out of your busy schedule to talk with me today.
Oh, you're very welcome, bud.
One more time, who are you? What do you do? Where can people find you?
So once again, my name is James, and people can find me on my cosplay page, Fix It Jim Cosplay, or you can add me on Facebook, James F. Jackson. And yeah, that's I'm on social media and I'm on there a lot.
Terrific, terrific. Thank you for joining another wonderful episode of Geek Talk with Tyler with your friendly neighborhood Tyler Man. If you like this episode, like, subscribe, and if you're feeling generous, hook a brother up with some of that sweet legal tender. As much as I like talking to y'all, a brother doesn't do it for cheap. But if you want to do it in a way that's free, feel free to recommend me to all your friends and family and add hashtag Geek Talk with Tyler to all your social media platforms. But no matter what you do by the end of the day, remember, stay geeky.